What's up, guys? This is a impromptu live, so I know it's like really, really late, so I don't expect a lot of people to be in this live. As you watch this on the replay, be sure to hit the thumbs up. Leave your comments for sure, so we could push this video out a little bit more. This is going to be under my Rich's Method podcast section, separate from my videos, right? So guys, this actually I brought this up before in one of my past lives, but in combination with Venezuela and different things. But I just want to cover this topic separately. Now, Cuba is the topic I'm going to be covering. It's January the 13th or 14th or something like that right now of 2026. It's a new year. The Trump administration has their sights set on regime change within Cuba, right? And I just wanted to touch on the topic. Now, I do know that a lot of guys, well, some guys, not a lot of guys, but I think certain types of guys definitely used to go into Cuba. I was living in the DR for many years. So while living there, I actually met a guy who had a child in Cuba. He had a daughter there. And, here and there, you go through a lot of stress. Mother would call to try to get help. It's definitely some countries where I would say that help, is one of them big things because the country just has so many problems, right? And Cuba happens to be one of those places. Now, while living in the DR, but dealing with things like lights going out, these kind of things, which is crazy because, as you guys know, I've been to Africa, and in South Africa, there was supposedly low shedding. When I was in South Africa, lights didn't got go out at all while I was there for about almost 3 months, right? And then Kenya, where I was staying many times in Kenya, the lights would go out here and there, but I would say like a week would pass before the lights go out, or sometimes if the light went out, it would go out for 5 minutes, sometimes a minute. And I've experienced more blackouts in Dominican Republic for longer periods of times than I have in Africa, which was just insane. I think the longest blackout I ever had in Africa was in Uganda. It lasted like 4 hours, and it reminded me so much of the Dominican Republic. I was like, oh hell no. Now Cuba. Can you imagine if you guys have been to the DR and you've experienced lights going out, or you've seen that so many Dominicans sometimes would have to buy an inverter if they're doing an Airbnb? Can you imagine what life would be like if you're visiting Cuba, right? Because of the embargoes, which is basically a blockade and taxes on any country that does deals with Cuba. So the only place Cuba was getting its technology, which was very old, any type of oil and support was typically from three countries: Russia, China, and the biggest one was Venezuela. Um, and some Caribbean countries like the one where I was born, Guyana, we also had deals with Cuba where we would exchange education. Basically, our teachers would go into Cuba. Our doctors would go into Cuba because Cuba was known for very good healthcare, right, and good doctors, and vice versa. We were known for having really great teachers and a high education system. So they would exchange those students, right? Our medical students go to Cuba to learn. Their teachers come over to our country, vice versa. Um, Now, guys, because I was in DR at the time when a lot of guys were going to Cuba, I always told myself, like, hell no, I don't want to go to Cuba. And the reason for that is just, you're living in DR already dealing with structural issues, cultural issues, the Chico mentality, which for some of you guys, if you're on vacation and the Chico mentality might work for you, it didn't work for me, man. Not when you're living in a country for a long period of time, right? But for some guys, I guess if guys are living in Sasua and they want to do what they call their rotation, that kind of thing of just, helping out your ladies who would come in and out and pretend they're your girlfriend and they pretend that they love you, that worked for some guys. I even saw where it come back to bite a lot of guys in the what, right? When they then realize it all collapses and the girls don't really give a damn, it was all about the money. But that's neither here nor there. Bottom line, those things combined always made me say, why would I want to go to Cuba? Now, people like different things, and some guys love Cuba. So, I even watch a channel with a particular guy who is Jamaican descent, and he loves Cuba. Content is based on that. Goes there a lot, and big up to him, by the way. Uh, we actually watch each other's channel. I've never met him, but we used to exchange comments. Now, I would say, man, for guys who love going down there, just like I did a warning about Colombia, you guys might definitely want to step back if you have interest in Cuba, and just hold it for a couple of years. Now, I will say this: at one point, the United Cuba had very, very deep ties. People seem to forget that Dominican Republic actually is not the closest island that used to do a lot of tourism with the United States. It was actually Cuba. Americans had businesses there and vice versa. And there was a big boom. They used to do lots of things. They used to trade rum, Cuban cigars before that became illegal. And they also used to do a lot of tourism, as well as casinos and these things. A lot of rich Americans had hotels. They used to go there and party. Had very close ties with Miami. That's why when everything collapsed, you have so many Cubans that came into Miami, right? It was called a wet foot, dry foot policy. If a Cuban could make it over because they didn't believe in the new regime, they can. All they had to do was touch soil in Cuba, and they were protected, and they could stay in America. Now, I just wanted to cover a little bit of that history. Now, I would say to guys who love Cuba, stay out of Cuba because America under the Trump regime wants to reinstate that old Cuba. And they've wanted to do that for a very long time. No president actually just made strong moves on it. What President Obama tried to do when he was in office was try to, give Cubans a taste of democracy again. And he figured he would use soft diplomacy to encourage that by saying to Americans, okay, you no longer have to fly through other countries to get into Cuba. You could say you're going there to help. And he was trying to give, people the opportunity to go there again and then hopefully have Cubans have that taste of democracy and hope that the Cuban government comes around. I don't think that would be the approach of Trump and his administration, and especially not with Marco Rubio, who family was one of those families that had to flee Cuba um, into the United States and wants to see that regime in Cuba fall. No, they took Maduro out of Venezuela. Most of the oil things that keep and guys, people tend to forget oil is not just only about electricity. Oil makes everything, right? Your plastics, your shoes, rubber, all these things are byproducts of oil. Your gasoline, your kerosene oil. Oil is not just only just energy. And Cuba was already having a major problem when it comes to infrastructure, keeping their electricity on. If you guys like Cuba and you paid attention, you might have remembered that a few months back, last year, 2025, Cuba actually for about almost a whole month without electricity in most of the island. They fixed some of that, but from what I understand, every day in most parts of the island, electricity is still out for most of the day, sometimes a day in a row. Can you imagine now with the United States of America telling Venezuela what to do and not do, right? What might happen to Cuba when it comes to infrastructural problems that are already there and even less oil being able to come into the country. Now, there's a possibility Mexico might help out. We already know Russia and China has issues dealing with Cuba and would help them. However, think about this. China already knows if it tries to push too much into the backyard of America, Cuba is one of the large islands as well as one of the closest islands to the United States, which is why it's so important to the United States and that influence that they don't want from China. So China is probably going to tread very lightly if they don't want to start a world war. Now, Russia is already bogged down. Russia was supposed to be the one that supposedly more than China would come to help Venezuela and Maduro if something was to happen. But Trump was very smart. He knew that Russia has its own issues. They're already going through back and forth with the United States and Europe when it comes to them invading, Europe and invading. We all know that, Ukraine and all these things. So they knew Russia was spread thin. Russia doesn't have the money, doesn't have the manpower. They definitely couldn't, you know, conquer Ukraine in 3 months that everybody thought they would do. So would they be able to send their military spread resources to deal with Venezuela? No. and they definitely won't be able to do that with Cuba, right? Some people think that the US might invade Cuba. I don't think so. I don't think they have to. Why did I mention those different things I just mentioned? It's to show the fragile economy that Cuba is facing. Cuba was under embargoes for the longest in history of any country, which helped destroy their economy, keep them in the 1960s, all the old cars, they can't receive certain things, and they already were kind of, teetering on the verge of collapse. We're being propped up by China, Russia, and Venezuela. Venezuela is now kind of pretty much out that picture. All Trump them has to do now is just squeeze a little bit more, right? They can try to bring Cuba to the brink of collapse, like what is happening in Iran economically so much that the Cuban people start to feel it so much that they might actually protest. They might actually want change. And then America just has to do its thing. Maybe a little bit of military, maybe a few strikes somewhere, these kind of things. Because the typical people who would prop up Cuba, they don't have the strength to do what they would have done in the past anymore. So unless something major happen and China literally decides let's take a risk of going to war with the United States of America, it's a very good possibility that Cuba is going to be the next to fall. When Trump finishes with his eyes on Denmark, I mean Greenland, whatever he decides to do next, man, is probably going to be more focused on Cuba, right? Um, so for the future, this could cause two things. It could either destabilize Cuba and it becomes like in the 80s, where Cubans are fleeing the island. It's same as what used to happen to Haiti. People are coming on boats trying to get to the US. Now, given what Trump has been doing on the borders, unlike in the past, people probably won't try that. And this is what I'm saying. Combined with those two things, the fact that they can't really come over like they used to, any country, right? Because of the whole thing with the borders that they're doing with ICE and all this. And then also the economic pressure. They kind of wouldn't have a choice. They would have to more do like Iran, which is say, hey, this is hurting us so much. We got to get rid of this regime. The regime is probably going to try to, be heavy handed on Cubans. And then eventually it's going to go how it goes, whether America has to go in and take out a few people or whatever, like they did with Maduro, right? To grab them out the country or whatever else. But for people who are looking for a future Cuba, maybe if that happens within the next 5 to 10 years, man, Cuba will be wide open for vacationing for the passport bro types. And actually, at one point, I would say into the future, even beyond that, if that happens, it will take away tourism from the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic tourism boom started after Cuba, right? They just replaced Cuba. Cuba used to be the Dominican Republic of the Caribbean, where Americans who were looking for that Latin culture used to go. All right. So was Venezuela. Venezuela, of course, was further away. It's kind of like looking at DR and Brazil. However, people forget that Venezuela was extremely rich at one point in the 60s, great roads, huge amount of oil money slushing around, kind of like the Saudi Arabia or what's it called? That everybody used to want to go on vacation now in the Middle East, right? Dubai. People used to jump over to Venezuela, right? Venezuela was right next door to Guyana, so I'm aware of this. Even though I wasn't born part of that time, the stories of the Venezuela that used to be, we know it exists because we also had Venezuelans in our country. So it's right next door, we're bordered by them. So I think if that does happen and Trump and Marco Rubio succeed, 10 years from now, man, even I would probably go to Cuba if I'm in that hemisphere of the world, right? Because Cuba will then reopen, it'll be wide open. And they got that whole historic tourism thing that they were already doing. The old cars of the 60s that were maintained. Cubans are very good in doing those kind of things because of what's happened to them. They can maintain something for a very long period of time. It should have been broken and not working, right? And that would be a big draw. Of course, the United States would drop any kind of limitation they have on travel to Cuba at that time, which Obama opened up the ability to say, well, you're going there to help and you can go to Cuba. But I remember many years in the United States when you had to fly to another country if you wanted to get into Cuba. Then Obama came and said, no, no, no. For humanitarian reasons, you can go to Cuba and enjoy, right? So if they manage to change their regime, even that they'll just get rid of and it'll be like a normal travel. And they will be looking to take advantage of the resources of Cuba like they used to back in the day. And a lot of Cubans who already haven't been able to go home for years from Miami, you know they're going to want to fly over there. And it's going to be a big boom. Would it take a little bit of doing, maybe a few years for to get the infrastructure up and going? Yes. But right away, oil and everything would start going back into Cuba, right? And people are talking about if they, what they would do with Venezuela. They would be Cuba's an island compared to a country in Venezuela, so in size. So it would be easier, faster, and quicker and better to dump money into Cuba, fix most of the issues when it comes to infrastructure. All the historic zones that are old now, of course, would stay tourist areas and tourist sites. Cubans would be going back and forth between the United States and America, as well as in Cuba, right? Would Trump them try to do the same thing with ICE and keep most Cubans who are on the island right now from having free thoroughfare to come into the U.S.? Yes, he would. They're just trying to, stop the Latin population and other populations from coming into the U.S. So that would continue. But Cubans who are already Americans would be back and forth within that country, pumping money into that country. They speak the language. They would start doing tourism. They would start doing restaurants. They would do everything they used to do. And I've lived in Miami and Fort Lauderdale before in that area, and I can tell you, Cubans are business people. They had many, many restaurants, and still do have a lot of restaurants in Miami and Fort Lauderdale and these kind of things, right? And that would be a big boom for the quote unquote passport bros, good vacations, good opportunities for them to go there. Not until that Cuba comes would I even be interested in going to Cuba. I wasn't interested in the past because I'm like, not even data and basic communication you can do properly when you're in Cuba. You listen to the big travel guys like Check and Effect and these guys when they go there, they show you on their videos their struggle and how even to upload the videos when they come back, they gotta wait till they pretty much come back to the U.S. Right? So I was more of a slow traveler. So could you imagine if I went into Cuba? It'll be only a few days, then try to do a few videos, then come out. And then the struggle, the food, the bad taste, certain things they can't get fresh there. Of course, as a foreigner, your money stretches and you can, but just going through that, I was never interested, right? And then the culture. There was some Cubans in the Dominican Republic. There are Cubans in Guyana. Um, for a brief time, there were some Haitians going into Haiti was another one of those countries. And I find it interesting that Cubans, as well as some Haitians, they want to go to the other countries, maybe because of the language barrier. And I look at Guyana as one of the places where I always try to tell Haitians and Cubans. I was like, hey, why just learn some English and go to Guyana? You'll have a far better life. But hey, that's how life is, right? I tell some Africans the same thing. I'm like, hey, it's not just the United States that exists out there that you can have a better life if you think your country is really poor and you're really struggling. But they tend not to listen. Um, Me on the flip side, I wouldn't want to go into those countries and experience certain things. I didn't mind DR. DR has where I would see Cuba going, and even DR has its problems. And after a while, wore me out. Right? Well, I was like, yeah, I wouldn't live here long term. I never planned to, so that didn't matter. Ended up staying in DR longer than I thought, but the point would still exist with Cuba, man. And I would say to the passport bros, watch yourself. Don't. This is not a time to be going down into Cuba because you never know which direction this thing might go. You don't want to put yourself in a bad situation. Same with Venezuela and Colombia for sure. Those are the two places right now, Colombia and Cuba. That I would say, hey, step back. Don't really get out of there. There's an election coming up in Colombia in a few months. The current president can't run any longer. He was already going back and forth with Trump. Apparently, they deal with some of the little issues, but Trump hasn't given up on that either because more sniff, sniff, white lady, you know what? was coming out of is coming out of Colombia than it was Venezuela. The whole thing for Venezuela was a lie. It was just about Maduro. They just want to get rid of him. So they were saying, hey, these bad things that Americans use are coming out of Venezuela when it was really coming from China, fentanyl. Now, does it come from Colombia? Absolutely. And there's parts of Colombia where the government doesn't actually control the country whatsoever. It's militias. And those militias also border Venezuela. That's how they would use it as a transit route. They would also use those Colombians would use transit routes out to Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, all these different routes to get their stuff north into Europe as well as in the US and to Mexico, right? So Colombia is definitely a big target if they really keep saying we're going to do this war on the bad stuff that Americans use. Uh, Being political because it's YouTube, guys. Read your lines, right? I don't want to get flagged. But so I would say watch Colombia. Who knows what's going to happen with the election? From what I understand, some of the people who are running in Colombia, they're kind of running kind of more like Trump's, right? So they would have to do like what Claudia Sheinbaum, who's the president of Mexico, she had to kind of play the game with Trump and encourage. We're helping you fight these dealers, right? So the next Colombian president might do the exact same thing. That'll cause a lot of destabilization. Unlike Venezuela, there are real paramilitary guys in Colombia, like armies. When I was in Colombia, I was watching the news, and there's their paramilitary called FARC. You guys can look it up. These guys have been fighting the Colombian government like forever. They're involved in all the dealings and these kind of things. Cuba doesn't have that. Cuba just has its hardliners that back the government from way back in the day, people with certain beliefs. Well, those same kind of beliefs existed in Venezuela, and we saw what happened, right? But Colombia would be a whole different animal. So watch yourself in Colombia. If I was literally living in Colombia right now, and at one point I had thought about doing their 2 year visa thing, um, I would have left Colombia, right? I would have been like, listen, who knows what's going to happen 6 months or sometime this year in 2026 with Trump, um, and what that might cause Colombia to be like if whether it go back to its old kind of ways because Trump now is maybe messing with them in the oil or putting restraints on their economy. Colombia is already a kind of a violent place, so that would only increase the chances. These guys who think they're getting scope in Colombia, for example, as people get more desperate, what happens to you as a foreigner? You become a target, right? And that's in any country. In the DR, you got a bunch of girls who usually target guys over there because, at the end of the day, they're trying to survive. And if they're from the bottom, whether they're offering themselves or tricking guys into different things, if a country gets harder, that desperation increases. That was also while living in DR, why I'm like, yeah, why would I want to go to Cuba, which is even worse? You really got to be into that lifestyle to want to go to Cuba, right? Because what else are you going there for? Let's just be honest. You're not going to try to be an expat living in Cuba. That's like a hard life. It's hard for Cubans, even harder for a foreigner who doesn't speak a language, right? Even if you do speak the language. So I would say watch yourselves in Colombia, but definitely this one is about Cuba. Sell to Cuba for a little bit for the guys who like going down there. I don't think many of my audience really are into Cuba, but if y'all are, you let me know. Um, yeah, I'm good, man. I know seeing there's a comment here. What's up? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, man. Cool. Respect. Yeah, I'm all right, man. Just dropping some of my opinions here for you guys, man. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm gonna hop off. Actually didn't expect so many people to jump in and out the live. So big up to that because of the time. But yeah, man. Just want to do a PSA. But yeah, when it comes to the future, if Trump do what they want to do, I would say Cuba will be wide open in like 3, 4 years. It'll be like the DR. The DR will fall off because it'll be competition. Um, and it also will be new for a lot of guys, right? So then the guys who are uncomfortable even going to Cuba or didn't even know how to get to Cuba, they might start to see Cuba as a place to go, a brand new first place, similar to the DR, different look, different culture. Cubans are a lot more educated, I can tell you that. A lot of them here and there speak English because they had free education system like Guyana did, similar to Venezuela, right? If Venezuela doesn't go the worst direction, Venezuela will also be one of those places that when people think of the DR, they'll be like, why the hell was I going to the DR? I can go to Venezuela, the education is better, the infrastructure used to be great. So just the roads and all these different things of Venezuela, people would be surprised. Venezuela has a bunch of little islands on the outside of Venezuela that would open up. They've got nice blue water, right? Even coming from Guyana, we already knew that there's a part of Guyana as you get closer to Venezuela where you start to see blue water, but it's in our jungles, right? So Cuba definitely, man, would be like it. And then if people want to go further, if Venezuela doesn't go crazy, and I think it might, I'll just be honest, because it's so close to Colombia and the issues. And then I think the militias between Colombia and Venezuela, those militias will start to jump from one country to the other and destabilize those countries trying to survive. But Cuba, no type of issues like that, right? And then the people in Cuba have already kind of been trained to be nice to American tourists, to Russian tourists. 'Cause don't forget, America was the one who was more cut off from Cuba. But Cuba still was doing business and tourism with European countries, some of them, as well as Caribbean countries, right? So it's not like nobody was going into Cuba. People were still going into Cuba. Cubans know not to do crime. That's one thing, but when you're under these kind of regimes, they don't play games with crime, right? So, like, Cuba has one of the lowest crime rates, which is crazy to say for a country where there's so many systemic problems and poverty, right? So when you think about that, you got to ask yourself, like, damn, how did the regime manage to maintain that? Well, they used to disappear a lot of people, just plain and simple. And then what's worse, if you mess with the tourists, oh, you definitely gone, right? So Cubans, the issues that exist, maybe with some violence and crime in Dominican Republic, or people taking advantage of the tourists but getting away with it because of the corruption with the police. That kind of culture is not really in Cuba that much. You see what I'm saying? So, do they have corruption? Every place have corruption. I'm not saying they don't have corruption, guys, but the levels where it's like in your face. You know, you've seen videos in Susu and DR where guys get into issues. Now there's a big fight and police come and they gotta then pay off the police as well as the girl and all kind of craziness. You don't tend to hear issues like that in Cuba, right? And I'm not promoting that kind of stuff or encouraging it either. I'm just saying this is life. It is what it is, and I know why most guys would even go to a Cuba, and it's definitely not 100% for the culture. They might even go to DR and be like, yeah, ready for the culture. Because DR is so Americanized in a way, but not in Cuba, right? So that's it, man. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Share it with somebody else. Hit the thumbs up. If you guys who appreciate my channel, please, if you want to, hit the buy me a coffee or the PayPal. Later on, I'm going to drop the link to that. Oh, actually, wait, man. I forgot to turn it on. There you go. Now it's at the bottom of the ticker. Go ahead and pick up an ebook or shoot a super thanks to me. Show your appreciation. Or just buy me a drink, man, by buying me a coffee. All right. It's buymeacoffee.com/Rich's Method. Then I got the PayPal, what is it? No, payhip.com/Rich's Method Media. My ebooks are over there. I also got that one Brazilian video for like $5. Pick that up if you feel like, hey, I ain't gonna just do a donation and nothing like that. Yeah, get something in return. Feel me? So just buy you something, then everybody equal. You get something, I get something at the same time. Feel me? All right, man. So that's it. Anyone, you guys got any questions, man? Before I go, shout out to Dark Green for his comment. Big up to y'all. I'm gonna give a little bit of time here for Q&A. We got 29 minutes and 30 seconds or something like that. I want to do just 30 minutes on this one. All right, cool. Y'all could drop it in the comment. I'll just reply. Peace.